bring Manager Council back to order. There we go. Next item on our agenda is joint agricultural state and public lands water resources request of an additional meeting day. Chairman Boner presented a letter. All of you have that in your file. We'll reference that now if you know, and take a moment and look it over while we're proceeding here. We have Chairman Heckland who's going to present. Okay, is he the one planning to present on this? Okay.
We can take a second lunch. We'll make that sacrifice.
Sir, welcome. We'll turn the time over to you.
Thank you. So I'm here
You
today.
got your mic on, right?
I do.
Okay.
Can you hear me okay?
Now I can.
All right, I'll get it closer. I'm here to make a request for another meeting. The committee, Ag Committee, voted at our last meeting mid-November to subpoena the former state lands director to get more information on a case that we had been working on. This is a case that the Ag Committee spent significant time on. We had a meeting in June, and then another one in September, and then the last one in November, and we spent the first morning of each of these working on a case that just didn't pass the smell test, and we kept asking questions. We never did get direct answers because the people most involved were invited to come and didn't come, and that would be former State Lands Director Mrs. Hill. So that is kind of the meat of the request. The committee came to this decision and the votes came in a variety of ways, a variety of reasons. For me, it was to get final closure on something that we just didn't quite feel we understood well enough. If you remember the vacant land bill that we had and passed, 2 years ago we passed it and it was vetoed by the governor. We amended it, did a few other things. This case was probably central to why we brought that bill. So what happened in this case is there was land that had, state lands, that had gone vacant, and it had historically been in the ranch land that Lehmans had purchased. And they went through a long process to try to get this state land, and it was eventually awarded to another ranch. And state lands probably didn't quite have the direction that we've given them now with that vacant land bill, but we would probably like more information from them. I don't know what else to say about it, but there are some good things that'll happen because of this. One of them is, I think, the state lands director will be more cautious in how they award state lands. The other thing, probably the biggest thing, is we have been a conservative legislature, as all of you know, and in my tenure, we've had general funds of $3.5 billion down to $2.5 billion. And when we get to $2.5 billion, we start cutting positions, and some of the positions we cut were in state lands. They've made requests for more help, and I think the Ag Committee, it was eye-opening for all of us to see why something like this could happen. and that they're just understaffed and can't pay the kind of attention they should to some of these state land issues. I don't know as I'm really blaming anybody, you know, from a rancher's perspective. There's a saying, you know, messing around with water, somebody's water, their state lands is like messing around with their wife. From a lawyer's perspective, that they would look at this and say nothing was done that's illegal. And we want something that is fair and well thought through for the people of Wyoming. So if you have any questions, I'd sure be willing to answer those now.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. Chairman Eklund, thank you. So the question I have is, so this is a request for a meeting day.
Yeah.
And do you have legislation pending in your committee that relates to this issue? Is there anything that your committee will get done this interim based upon this meeting? In other words, is this just a fact-finding mission for future legislation? Ultimately, you know, your committee's, you know, responsibility is policy, ag policy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we've passed a vacant lands bill. And so my question is how does this meeting relate back to, do you have legislation in session that this is going to be valuable information to support legislation you're bringing? Or do you have a bill that's going to, you intend to bring out of this committee on this issue? That's what I would ask.
Go ahead, Representative.
Mr. Chairman. Yes, Majority Floor Leader Sommers. We're requesting the meeting. We're requesting the ability to subpoena. And we have about 5 state lands bills. Some of them do pertain to this. They may be what information. It's hard to say. I don't know what else we can get from the people who were directly responsible for the decision on this. There were levels of decisions that happened before. Let me show you something. This is the Lehmans case, and most of our committee was given this, and we read through it. Some of it I didn't understand. I'll admit it was hard to study it. But the parts that I did study and understand, I believe that we have legislation that can be helpful to give state lands direction to maybe prevent this from happening again. As far as learning anything new, the one thing that sticks in my mind that could be a problem in the meeting is because what happened was legal, there was nothing done that anybody'd go to, they wouldn't be in serious trouble for because it was legal. It wasn't appropriate, and in my mind it wasn't, when you have one set of people that for years you have jumping through hoops and hoops and hoops, and then suddenly at the end of it you award the lease to someone else. One of the hoops they jumped through after I didn't mention this and should. I don't know if the management council's aware, they went through, maybe I'll go through that, the process they went through. They went through their appeals process after having tried to secure this land. It was eventually awarded to Wagon Hound because they bid more and had been earlier awarded a temporary use lease that I don't believe the Lehmans had. But when the Lehmans took it to the administrative procedures office, and they had a hearing, and that officer sided with Lehmans there. And
Excuse me, what office was that?
I think it's the administrative procedures office.
Oh, okay, all right.
Hearings, yes.
Thank you, go ahead.
And that hearing officer sided with the Lehmans and said, the consideration for the award of the lease should have probably gone to the Lehmans. When we explored that a little bit, we find out that still the Office of State Lands doesn't have to do what the administrative hearing officer had asked for. So I don't know if we'll gain anything more out of finding out why State Lands Director would have overruled that decision by a hearing officer. That probably the only thing that Lehmans didn't do that would have been beneficial to their case would have been to go, and they jumped through hoops. I never would have gone through the trouble they went through. But the last thing they didn't do was go to a district court, before a district court, circuit court, I think that's who it was, to appeal it one last time. So that was probably the only thing they didn't do. And I'm not sure that we can do anything to reverse this case. It's too much water under the bridge. But maybe we can collect a little more information to assure that it doesn't happen again. But at the very least, where we are today, and because we did this, we're in a better position to see that State Lands is staffed adequately to maybe assure this won't happen again. Does that answer your question?
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. It was mostly just, we can't go back in the past. And so I'm really struggling to understand why this one more meeting, how it's going to inform policy moving forward. If you've already developed bills, that's the part I need to know. If this is just an effort to shed light on something, I guess that's fine in of itself maybe. But ultimately, your committee is about developing policy. And so I'm just trying to understand what's the policy we're trying to get out of this?
Mr. Chairman, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, so I'm coming before you as a committee chairman and a committee member with the request that the committee has made. The motion was on the floor by the committee. I'm trying to explain why I'm here, but that's part of it. I voted in favor of this thing because I just didn't feel I ever quite had closure until I found out from the former State Lands Director. The water under the bridge is that it was done, it was done by a previous administration and other people. So will we pick up anything more? I'm not sure. And there needs to be set guidelines for state lands to follow. There needs to be people to be able to look at these guidelines, understand the law, and apply it to each of the cases. I sat in a meeting a while back with the SLIB board, and it was all day, and those people were handed document after document. They got to state lands. There were state lands, and there were oil leases, and it was literally hundreds of things they would vote on at once. A lot of the mineral leasing was that way. So to make these decisions, it has to be made by state employees, probably with in this case, the Office of State Lands, and I don't believe they had the personnel to pay attention to it. That's a possibility. I'd like to know that for sure, or whether it was awarded for some other reason. But that's my understanding of how it happened. My reason for being here is to appeal before you on behalf of my committee, and we voted affirmatively to ask for this day. And
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate your work. We can't answer for state lands, but let me ask you, you held up, was that a court document that you held up? What was the date on that?
oh, well, there's several dates. Mr.
I'm trying to get a feel
President.
for the time period here. You had that, and then the appeal
goodness.
in front of the administrative office.
Well, it's gone on for 8 years.
8 years.
What would be the span of time from when to when? These are the Lehmans who were affected by.
Okay, and maybe if you're done, we can invite the Lehmans to testify. Okay, go ahead.
Go ahead. I'm ready.
Chairman. A couple questions, talking a little bit with Representative Worf about this, and it matches with the fact pattern that you just laid out, where this was discussed at 3 meetings.
Yep.
And there were 2 opportunities. You know, one of the things I think is there's in the media is that there seems to be this notion that, well, one opportunity was provided for the Attorney General to come in, but my understanding is that really it was open to 2 meetings, which, you know, makes sense with the facts you're laying out, that it was discussed at 3 meetings. So I assumed it was brought up at that first meeting in the morning. There was some kind of motion to continue it, and the AG declined to come to that second meeting. And then I believe there was a more formal motion at that second meeting, or maybe a more strongly worded one. And so can you lay out a little bit, how many times was there an attempt to have that done? So
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. President. No, there was one. You know, there was one meeting, and it was, the request was made during the meeting in September to ask, and that was kind of what Chairman Boner and I requested of the committee, that we ask them and not demand that they send a subpoena, if I recall things correctly. And so that's what we did. The ones that responded were Acting Secretary of State Allred, as well as Treasurer Meyer. They were the ones that responded to the deal. But so it was only one request, and we didn't. There was advice to those people to not respond to this, is what
Great.
was
Thank you.
indicated.
Follow up, Representative?
thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a little bit of a different question. You know, there was a little bit of a colloquy earlier about how this will affect the bills that are upcoming, and I think they do have some merit, that there's some interaction there. But also, I think what, you know, is missing on that, sometimes I think this is something that the Wyoming State Legislature struggles with, is the agency oversight factor, that those agencies within the committee jurisdiction are, you know, that oversight is an important aspect of that committee function. Certainly at the federal level, at times it can be more vigorous than even the attempt to draft legislation, depending on what year we're in. But, you know, I think at times that agency oversight isn't emphasized enough. And I was just hoping you could maybe comment on that a little bit, because I think the precedent here, if an agency can just stonewall, is deeply, you know, it's a bad precedent. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you want to respond to that, or we should?
Well, I'm not sure I got the question out of it.
Perhaps a statement. Okay,
Yeah.
let's do this. Any other questions for our Ag Chair? Okay, with that, I'm assuming you would like to weigh in on this.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You need to identify yourself for the record.
Jim Blackburn, House Representative for House District 42, also an Ag member, committee member. To answer Majority Floor Leader Summers' question about whether we could get something done if we had the one more meeting, I would visualize that if we have the meeting and we don't have that meeting on the 31st of December, that we would have time to fact find and write a bill that we could present at the next session.
What was the time frame you said?
Excuse me?
Representative, you referenced a time frame that you could.
I said, as long as you don't give us the date of December the 31st, we have to have some time to have the meeting, do the fact find, and then draw up the bill.
Okay.
I'm sure we could, if there's enough facts there, I'm sure we can draw a bill up before the first of the year to present it at the next session.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Representative Blackburn?
Mr. President,
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. President. Chairman Eklund, Representative Blackburn, and appreciate Chairman Boner's letter and this concern. I think the concern is real. I think what Chairman Eklund identified is that there's nothing that can be done legally in response to this situation right now because of the timing. But very, very curiously to me, and what I haven't heard, what questions would you need to ask the current Attorney General that would help you determine what bill you would need to write? What questions would you want answered? No one has been, it's just, my concern is two things. When we're way out of time, right? And the situation has already happened. The damage has happened. We can't undo it right now. Waiting until the next interim to work this issue more thoughtfully is certainly an option and prudent because there's nothing urgently in front of the legislature that can be remedied within a matter of a couple of weeks or even a reasonable bill draft by the start of session on January 10th. So if we're giving reasonable expectations to members of the public and constituents who have been affected by this, I think that's one important. Or if the committee is just posturing with the Attorney General for the refusal to appear in front of the committee upon asked, which I understand that frustration, but is it really about that piece of the refusal to appear and that's not acceptable by God or the legislature? And we are the watchdog over everyone in the state? Or are there legitimate questions that you would like asked that if they were answered, you could actually move forward with providing solutions? And if so, I want to know right now, because you've had months to think about it, what those questions are.
Chairman?
Well, the main question, Mr. Chairman, the main question I guess I would ask is, what went into this decision after we had a family who had gone for years going through state lands rules and I'm not sure they were even rules, just ideas. You need to do this, you need to do that, you need to do this. Then it's awarded to somebody else, and then it's awarded to that person. You go through a state hearing officer who says it should have been awarded to the Lehmans, and the land director gives it to the others as well without much consideration. I think part of the problem we have, and I think we've corrected it with the other vacant land, with the new vacant lands bill on how they can award the lease to landowners adjacent. As far as any other questions, I'm not sure. We have worked on bills trying to clarify the processes that state lands will use to make their decisions. Sometimes they don't have clear guidance on what to do. The vacant land bill was a result of that. They didn't have clear guidance on how to deal with that thing. Whether this will improve things, I'm not sure. We have 5 state land bills coming up that are committee bills, wasn't it 5? I think that we voted on. I think it is 4 or 5, enough, more than we generally have. And I think we can improve things with those bills. We might be able to amend them a bit. Whether we will change it enough, this is just a tough issue is what I can tell you.
Thank you, Chairman. Do you want to follow up, Senator?
Yes, please, Mr. President, thank you. I just want to express my concern. One is the timing and the logistics of this, which is unusual. But a frustration that I have seen as a member of this legislature, when some of the actions and the decisions we take affect real people and real constituents rather than our own ideas. And there are people the Lehmans, who have been affected by this decision and who clearly have been frustrated and been treated unjustly or unfairly for years. And they've driven here today, I believe, with some type of expectation. And I fear what that may be, based on beliefs that we can do more than we possibly could today or even in this next session. And I'm very concerned about what has been represented to the constituents and the people of Wyoming about what we can and cannot do concerning their interests. And they deserve a little more candor, I think.
Chairman?
Yes. Mr. Chairman, now I think I know where you're going with this. Throughout this process, I believe Chairman Boner and most of the committee has been open with the Lehmans that we probably can't fix their problem. And our hope is that we'll prevent it from happening in the future, prevent these kind of volatile situations that don't seem fair. Like I said, as a rancher, I look at it, it doesn't look fair. If I were an attorney, I'd look at it and say, well, it's legal enough so you can do it. But I think we can do better than that as a ag committee and oversight over state lands to try to set up rules and guidelines for them to be able to follow. I think we can, as time goes on, can improve things by understanding what went wrong. But the Lehmans, they'll be up here in a bit. I don't think any of us have led them to believe that there's going to be a reversal on this. Too much water under the bridge for that one, but not the next one.
Thank you, Chairman. Any other questions for our Ag Chairman or Representative Blackburn while we have them? Either questions or comments? Okay. We thank, Representative Blackburn, did you have follow-up?
Thank you, Mr. President. Maybe to try to answer Senator Nethercott's question about whether we were doing this, the subpoena to try to punish Attorney General, the answer for me, my vote was that's not the reason that I voted for this bill or for this to happen. The reason that I voted yes for this to happen was so that I could hear from her what the problem was and what caused that problem so that we could maybe rectify it down the line. I'm not going to be here, but maybe the next legislature can take steps to make sure that something like this doesn't happen again. Does that answer your question, Senator?
Senator, did you want to respond? Okay, thank you. All right, a reminder to the committee that we.
Chairman.
Okay,
Mr. Chairman.
Okay, just a second. Just a reminder to the committee, while we've been acknowledging the House Ag, the Senate Ag Chair has a letter in your file for the record, so. All right, Mr. Floor Leader Driscoll.
Mr. Chairman, I just had a couple questions on what shape those bills were in and how much work they needed, because my concern is we give another meeting and that we still don't have much notice on the bills going to the floor. Are they in shape that they're able to be ready to go to the floor, or do you have to have another meeting to get them where they're quote roadworthy? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman Eklund, do you want to take that?
Yes, I will. We've reviewed the bills. We've changed them a little bit, tweaked them here and there. The bills are the result of most of the work we've done during the summer, and I think the bills are ready to go as they are without any. There will be amendments, and I'm sure some of them will be good changes to the bill. They just usually are, but it's the legislation isn't dependent on this meeting. Those bills.
All right. Committee, if we have no more questions for these good representatives, Lehmans have traveled quite some distance, so we'll bring them up to visit with us. Yeah. Okay. We weren't sure if we were forcing you into the chair or not, but welcome. Go ahead and state your name for the record, and thank you for coming.
Thank you, Chairman Dockstetter and committee. So the reason why we're here is that it's our civic duty to see how this fares out. Just because somebody's wronged and that is not made right doesn't mean that you continue to allow a process to exist, to allow it to continue. It's our civic duty to bring it forward so others are not wronged. And so that's why we have the legislative branch in our great country to help hear from the people as to what's happening. It's how you learn what's happening. And so that you can then figure out as oversight of these agencies, whether they're taxed or not, of how to better implement the laws that you create at the legislative branch, that then the executive branch is happy to serve in response to. And so that's the only reason why we're here, is to make sure and to see this process. I homeschool. I have children that are very interested. My children are 5th generation on our place, of century ranching family. And this matters because range management matters. And how this has been totally changed on the landscape out into the field isn't smart for animals. The animals don't have water to go to of how it's now been done. And animals don't need humans to show them. They look, they know. The water sits on the private land. And so with that said, just because someone thought they could just carve out that state land lease and put it within them, doesn't even make good sense on the ground. And so if we can't have you all to come to and have our voices heard and respected, why are we all here? What's your job? That's all.
A question for you, and we'll ask the committee for questions too. Yeah, didn't you in the beginning introduce yourself?
My name is Gigi Lehman,
Okay.
John Lehman's wife.
Yeah. And your home?
Pardon me?
Yeah,
In
you-
Douglas, Wyoming.
Douglas, Wyoming. Thank you. Mrs. Lehman, I'm trying to get a time frame in my mind of how long this has been going on.
Okay, so this vacant lease was allowed to be vacant for close to 20 years. We inquired half of those years effectively almost by the time it was awarded. So we went back and forth with the state agency once we acquired that land to put cattle on as respectable citizens and saying, hey, how can we make this right? We knew the person that it was bought from did not pay up their state lease. And so my husband tried very hard to communicate with them every year. That's what a responsible citizen does. And say, hey, do you care? What are we going to do about this? What our case unfolded with the OAH process, because we truly believed that Wagon Hound was false and misleading, and that state would be curious as to know that when they did their application on the vacant land lease application. But when we started digging more into the file, unbeknownst to us, TUPs were issued all of those 8 years we were inquiring, and we were treated differently. And our case also shows in testimony by the Assistant Director, Jason Crowder, that that is not allowed in the rules to do that. And so why would a director do that? And why would, in the testimony, Jason Crowder say this had gone on way too long and
Yeah.
it shouldn't have?
That's what I'm trying to find out. What was the start date for this when you started?
So when my husband started, it was 2010.
2010. Okay.
And our exhibit M showed that communication with the office by email that was entered. So, and then, anyways, with that said, long story short, the office then deemed 13 questions out of the application for the vacant state lease as only 3 of those questions being material, 10 not. And so therefore, anything that had been happening that was, we were treated differently, was completely considered immaterial by the eyes of the state, but not by the Office of Administrative Hearing Examiner.
Understood. That court case that was held up, what was the rough date of that?
Of what?
Approximate date of that court case that was held up?
So this was the OAH hearing.
Yeah.
So that was this order that the SLID board did at the direction of Bridget Hill as the former director, was April of 2020. But the case started for the application in 2018, right after Wagon Hound purchased an adjacent land piece of a sliver next to the state land, a sliver of the state land next to this adjoining land. At November of 2017, the Office of State Lands automatically, some miraculous way, was able to have a vacant land land lease procedure go into place where then an application can happen. But we don't have the answers as to why. When the order was done in April 2020, as you all can remember, that was the very first Zoom meeting for them with COVID, and we weren't allowed as a public to talk, to even ask questions, and our attorney was not even afforded a copy of that order beforehand.
Okay, thank you. Just trying to get the time frame in the years. Thank
Absolutely.
you for doing that. Sounds like
Absolutely.
you got it right there, a lot of
Yep.
years. Thank you. Committee, questions for Mrs. Lehman? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate you coming up. Appreciate the drive too. Is there anybody in the room who'd like to testify in regards to this? Go ahead, sir, and state your name.
Good afternoon, Chairman Dockstetter,
Good afternoon.
Chairman Barlow, members of the committee. To address your question, Mr. Chairman, Representative Summers, with regard to what we would like to gain out of this, what kind of change or policies would we garner with if they had an extra meeting? I think one of the concerns that we have is when you have, in this particular case, when you have a former state land director, in this case Bridget Hill, who for 6 years oversaw the Office of State Lands, made these kind of recommendations to a board of elected representatives, the SLIB board, that were clearly in violation of rules, basically employed a whole host of unwritten policies and procedures, that after we ourselves went through, for all practical purposes, a judicial process, that being the Office of Administrative Hearings, where everyone involved in this case, whether it be Wagon Hound, the office, and ourselves, had an opportunity to state our positions, state our arguments, and defend why we did what we did in that independent, unbiased forum. You had the hearing examiner who took over a month to weigh all the evidence, hear all the facts. She came down with a recommended order based upon findings of fact and conclusions of law. To then have that go to the SLIB board, now I understand they have the last word. That's constitution. They have the ability to do that. But the problem therein is that when you have a former director who is now appointed to become now the Attorney General by a sitting board member, that being the governor, to be the Attorney General, and one of the functions of the Attorney General is to now then represent the Office of State Lands and Investments and to advise the SLIB board over the proceedings when she was the acting director of that office. That creates a major conflict of interest. And when you talk about the due process and the rule of law, we really are not really afforded that, in our opinion, particularly if you have an independent process, that being the OAH says, yeah, we've got some problems here. So one of the concerns is that kind of policy of having a former director to now assume that kind of role as an Attorney General that can basically justify her actions and advise the SLIB board on how to rule in a case such as this. It's gone through a process, a judicial process, and to basically usurp that process, it's not good. It's not good policy when it comes to citizens who may have a grievance with a state agency and trying to get remedy. I mean, we should be afforded that. And to have that opportunity usurped should not happen. So one of the things I think is concerning is that that kind of thing shouldn't be allowed to happen. We can't have former directors or of agencies, whatever they may be, now assume or be appointed to or elected positions where they can justify those actions in a former capacity.
Appreciate your concerns on that, Mr. Lehman. Thank you. I think the decision of this committee will stand on whether or not to grant the extra day, but I appreciate you giving the background and the concerns too, and thank you to Mrs. Lehman for the time frame. You folks have been working on this a long time, haven't you? Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Lehman?
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead, Floor Leader Driscoll.
Mr. Lehman, I have great empathy for what's happened to you and your family, and I feel for you. I have a couple questions for you. One, by subpoenaing the AG, it really isn't a court setting. It's legislators asking a question, and what your thoughts would be on what they're actually going to accomplish by doing it, which I understand what you want. And my second is, I don't have a complete understanding of your case. Why did your family not go ahead and appeal after the last hearing? Because as I understand, there was one more step that you could actually go to district court. And why did you choose not to? Because it seems to me everything went your way, and then at the last step, you chose not to go to court. So if you could enlighten me on those, maybe I'm just misinformed, I'd sure appreciate it.
Mr. Lehman?
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to defer that. I will attempt to answer the first question.
Okay.
Representative Driscoll. I'm sorry, Senator or Representative, I apologize.
Senator Driscoll.
Senator Driscoll, I apologize. Thank you for your question. I believe that there is an impending bill or pending bills with regard to the Attorney General's office being an elected position as opposed to being an appointed position. And so I think in this particular case, it may serve as a case study of when we have a SLIB board tied in with the Office of State Lands and Investments. I think that's pretty close in that regard. I think if we could look at that bill or impending bill that would try to create more of a checks and balances to prevent this kind of thing, somewhat, for the lack of a better term, favoritism that goes on or potentially could go on, I think that would be helpful. And so I think that this particular case, answering these kind of questions, may help address some pending legislation that I think is being considered for introduction into this upcoming budget session.
Mrs. Lehman, do you want to follow up?
Mr. Chairman, Dockstader and Senator Driscoll, with regards to the appeal, this seems to always come up, it would be more of a procedural thing at that level. And so how that is my understanding, how that works, is that the district court would look and see whether or not the slip board had taken in account all that was presented before it. The thing that happens in this instance is it is the right of the slip board to make these kinds of decisions, and the district court isn't going to get into the middle of what a slip board that oversees an agency necessarily is going to do. What happens now with what our case had unfolded, you have to go back to the original appeal, is that we assumed that the state did not know that Wagon Hound was false and misleading in their application. But in discovery, we realized that the state was in complete understanding what Wagon Hound was doing. They just looked the other way, and they created a model, and that's all in testimony. And so with that, it's now at this legislative level that matters, because are you going to look at how to better run an office through the legislative process when something is running awry this way or not? And so that's why we chose to come here, and that the appeal would not have worked because it wouldn't work with what we had discovered, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Senator Driscoll, follow up?
Thank you. I think it was a good explanation. I understand where she's at, and from that end, I think it's good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Did you have a second question, Senator?
I don't believe so. I'm not sure what we're going to accomplish. I will heads up them. I'm probably going to be a no vote on the extra day because the cost and what it actually accomplishes. I think we're pretty aware where it's at, and like I said, for Lehmans, I'm a rancher as well, and I've had my own problems with state land over the years. I'm pretty aware of it. I think we're capable of dealing with policy to help correct your problems and what's happened without going to another day of meetings. And I'd give them a chance to comment on that end of it. That, I believe it costs us around $10,000 if we have another day of meetings.
Let's come back to the committee. We have the Lehmans, both of them in the chair now. Any questions for them? Go ahead, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much. So thank you for being here, Mr. and Mrs. Lehman. So do you believe you have the complete record that the chairman held up earlier? Do you believe the complete record is public? Or do you think there are documents that are not part of the record that you would like to see that may be gained from having this conversation or this next meeting? So that's my first question. Do you believe you have the complete record? And the second question goes to the fact the Attorney General, is there any evidence in the record that the Attorney General did or did not recuse herself from advising the State Land Board? I think this is the State Land Board, not the SLIB Board probably that took this up, but maybe it's the SLIB Board. Is there any evidence that there was not a recusal or there was a recusal, either way? So completeness of the record and then any evidence of recusal or not so. Thank you.
Mrs.
Thank you,
Lehman?
Mr. President.
Yeah, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Barlow. So with regards to the complete record, we actually have not looked at what y'all got, what the committee got. We lived it, we saw the record, and so it was all auditory, and then it was actually transcribed. And so the record is transcribed for that hearing. With regards to what happened in April 2020 on the Zoom meeting with the recommendation from the Office of State Lands to the land commissioners, is that the current sitting director, Scoggins, actually yielded her position to Bridget Hill to come in and present for that case and two cases that came after us. And she had an adjoining assistant AG with her. And so in that visual, it doesn't appear to be that she was truly recused herself. And so with that, I would say she did not. And I can ask my husband if he thought anything more than what I said.
Mr. Lehman?
Mr. Chairman, not that I'm aware of, that she did not recuse herself or her agency from deciding or ruling in this case or exercising any of her opinions or findings of fact, conclusions of law.
I'm not sure. Did you have your question answered in there? That's all in there? You want to follow up?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I guess, and thank you. Do you believe, and if you haven't looked at the entire record or the transcribed 2020 thing, I can't, I guess my question in my mind is, was she asked to testify by current Director Scoggins as the previous director or as the acting Attorney General? Because I think that is material to what is being discussed here is, was she giving background because she was the director and the legal advice was coming from an associate or someone else on her in the office, not associated with the director herself in that previous capacity? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Maybe that's more of a statement than I'm just trying to parse out what role, I mean, what your role you believe she was playing or not playing, I don't know. I want to know what the record would show that she was playing in that discussion.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, and Representative Barlow. That's a good question because that was our first Zoom meeting, and so how things were done, we were looking at their backs. We did not have any information provided to us before the meeting, not even the draft of the order. The way I understood it is that they went into an executive session beforehand to discuss things, and then it was semantics at that point. With regards to how she presented herself, with regards to our case and two cases after, they did deal with decisions she made as the OSLI director. So they were three decisions that she did speak and present how they would, to that land commissioners, how to guide them as to what to do about them. I myself can tell you, as a certified paralegal, and gone through the certification process, and lawyers themselves know that they have to have ethics every year. And the the visual of that to the layperson is she's not recused. So that does matter. And so for what it's worth, I tell you that.
Thank you. Committee, any other questions for Lehmans? Go ahead, Mr. Lehman.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Barlow, one of the things that did come about in that Zoom meeting was that when Ms. Hill did come in, the governor did address her initially as Director Hill, and then corrected himself and saying, oh, Attorney General Hill. So you almost got the impression that the director and the Attorney General are almost one and the same. That's disturbing. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, committee, our request here is to have an additional day. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Senator. Request here is to have an additional day before this session closes out. And thank you for coming up. Appreciate that. Before we take this, let me put one more request out for public comment. Any other public comment? The request is for an additional day. I don't think so. Usually Anthony will let me know such things. Thank you. Request is for an additional day. And some of you have weighed in your questioning process as to where you stand. This would be an opportunity before we put this to a vote, whether you'd want to. Anyone else would like to speak to it? Go ahead, Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I first learned about this situation in, I believe, February of 2021. I was actually eating at Perkins with somebody after Mass. It was during session and after the bill draft deadline on a weekend. And John was there, and, you know, afterwards we kind of were chatting, and he brought up that, you know, there's the situation that that would be good for the legislature to take a look at. And we had a couple meetings about it, had a meeting with Auditor Racinas about it. And it became clear as we went through the summer kind of looking at this that, you know, this is something that going through the full committee process would be very appropriate in getting answers to these questions. And something is wrong when a committee goes completely through the process and is not able to get their questions answered due to the refusal of a state official to answer the questions that they've put forward. And this is totally within the agency oversight role that we have in the legislature, and it's very important that we carry out that role. So to say that it's just, you know, about the bills that are on the table, I want to push back on that a little bit. I mean, it's also about that agency oversight role, which is very important to this legislature. And to allow the clock to sort of be run out for a new committee to come into place, and then restart the process next year, I don't think that's healthy for our process, and I don't think it's a good precedent. The Office of Administrative Hearings sided with the Lehmans. The Lehmans hired an attorney at great cost to themselves, and at that April meeting, which was done first meeting after COVID started, where, you know, frankly, the procedures, I think, were still kind of amorphous. I mean, you guys remember that period. That hearing was basically ignored. So the Lehmans are coming to the state legislature to ask us to look at this, not so much about trying to reverse this. I mean, and I think everyone has been clear on that. It's frankly, it was a very difficult conversation for me in 2021 when I had that with the Lehmans. But the Lehmans are patriots, and they believe that we can continue to improve our state as I believe, and we can't improve if we aren't open to questions being asked. We can't. And if we have the attitude that everything is just fine. Both committee chairmen want this meeting. I think we should, you know, one of the things I ran on as a member of management council was to listened to our committees and listened to our committee chairman. Both of them want it. And I think it's very important to the process with which this was done. At that second meeting, they were going to do the subpoena motion at the second meeting. And the chairman asked, let's ask them formally. Let's not go, let's wait. Let's do it that way. And then if they don't do it, then we'll subpoena. And the members who were going to bring that motion agreed to do that. And then we have the situation when they don't show up at the third meeting where the clock is allowed to be run out. I mean, what kind of precedent does that set? So I think we also need to consider the actions of the committee members in question who, in deference to those committee chairmen, said that they were going to, give a chance for this to be done in a way that's a little more informal and in keeping with the way typically things have been done. But no, they were, stonewalled at that third meeting. So I just think this is really about accountability to the people through the legislative branch, and the legislative branch is there to respond to the concerns of our constituents. The Lehmans have done this the right way the whole time. And in terms of what's going to be accomplished, I think we're going to get some clarity on this question. And the reality is this is not, it could extend forever. And I think that the Lehmans have gone through this process, and we should have this meeting to get some answers to these questions. And so the committee can carry out the agency oversight duties that are very important to our role here in the state legislature, and what they've been attempting to be done their entire interim. So I'd ask for an aye on this motion to have this extra meeting day. Thank you.
Thank you. Further comment? Representative Summers.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question of Matt. How often in our history, and it was probably in the meeting materials, have we subpoenaed directors or of agencies or sitting attorney generals, or how often have we done that as a legislature?
Go ahead, Matt.
Mr. Chairman, I can't give a complete history on the use of legislative subpoenas throughout the Wyoming legislature. In my time here in the last 15, 16 years, we've only used the subpoena power of the legislature once that I'm aware of, and that was in the investigation of Superintendent of Public Instruction, Cindy Hill. We issued quite a few subpoenas in that case. The investigative committee did, both for documents and for witnesses to appear before that investigative committee. And Superintendent Hill herself was subpoenaed in that case.
Thank you. Do you need a follow-up?
Follow up, Mr. Chairman, and then a couple comments as well. So in that process, there was actually an investigative committee set to look at a specific issue, correct?
Director?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Summers, there was a committee of House members created by Management Council, provided with a budget, with a directive from Council to investigate the actions of the Superintendent of Public Instruction.
Thank you. Go ahead, Representative.
And yeah, Mr. Chairman, thank you. I feel for you guys. I think public officials need to be responsive to the legislature, need to provide information when sought after. I don't believe in the subpoena process being done by a committee necessarily, unless that committee is investigated. I don't understand really what will be gained out of this as far as policy. I think the Ag Committee has dug into this sufficiently that if they haven't finished with the bills now, they'll bring more bills to tighten this process up. So I don't really know what we gain out of it. If we think there is wrongdoing, if the legislature believes there's wrongdoing, then I think it's incumbent upon us to develop an investigative committee. And then you go down that process of investigating a very specific offense that we believe was the case. And I don't believe we're not certainly doing that with this. So I'm going to be a no on this, but I certainly do understand that I think our public officials should be more forthcoming. And I think it was disappointing that they weren't.
Thank you. Further comments from the committee?
Mr. President?
Go ahead.
Thank you. I too am going to be a no vote, but want to explain that very clearly. I am certainly compelled by your experiences with the process and the unfairness that you have experienced. And I am proud of the work of the Ag Committee, despite my pointed questions at you, for taking up this issue so seriously and working it and providing bill draft solutions. And continue to work with the stakeholders and the constituents so that this legislature is actually responding to your concerns to make sure that this doesn't happen to other Wyomingites again, and that the process is fair and transparent. I also have heard your concerns regarding your concerns of perceptions of impropriety or conflicts, and certainly those are conversations that will continue. But contrary to other opinions at this dais, the clock has run out. It's December 1st. New committees have been assigned and new legislators have been elected. The Joint Ag Committee moving forward for the session that would be handling these issues will be new. And so the clock has run, unfortunately. But that doesn't mean the inquiries stop because we vote no today. And that's was my greatest concern over kind of realistic expectations of what we're being asked to do today. As Management Council, we do things for legislative committees like grant additional days to work. That's it. That's what we're being asked to do. And regardless of the importance of that issue or how little it may be, we would be very unlikely to do that on December 1st with a new legislature coming in for January for our start of a session when bill drafts really should be finished of those committees' work. So it has less to do with your concerns or the importance or relevancy of those issues, which again, it is clear to me that there is enough interest by all the important people in this room that your concerns are going to continue to be heard. I will continue to hear them. I know the Ag Committee will continue to hear them. This council will continue to hear them. And so we look forward to resolving those concerns more thoughtfully, but I don't think it's appropriate to issue a subpoena to the Attorney General. I will issue a warning on that. My concerns, which is that this is a very personal issue, as opposed to real concern over ranch lands or state lands. And it really may become more about the office of the Attorney General or the specific Attorney General, and that is concerning to me. So I'm just going to leave that there, as opposed to fixing a process to make sure things like this don't happen again. Thank you for coming today.
Thank you. Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I'm going to support the request, and really for a very simple reason, which is that without details, without a full understanding, without really delving into the specific request, what it comes down to is that we have a standing committee that by motion requested an extra day. And over the past decade that I've served on Management Council, with almost no exceptions that I can recall, have we turned that down. We support decisions and requests made by chairmen, whether we necessarily agree with them or not. And so I'm not going to comment on any of the substantive issues. I'm not going to comment on my thoughts regarding this specific instance or this case or what would happen in the meeting. It really is just, this is a process thing. We're the Management Council. Have we got the money? Yeah. Is this germane? Which is the second question I would ask. Yeah. Do I approve of the request? Yes. And for no further reasons than that I think our role is to approve unless we have a reason to disapprove. And this is a perfectly logistically and procedurally legitimate request by the good chairman and his co-chairman. So I will support.
Thank you. Further comments? Go ahead. Representative Conley.
Thank you, Mr. President. And though a compelling speech, I'll too vote no, for slightly different reasons, honestly, that I think what was presented to us today is compelling enough to say, first, there isn't a bill draft that you're working on. You're not going to finish up an issue, and to me, that's what would be germane. But that the issues that you've brought up are complicated enough that they really should go to the interim. They really should. It should be the number one topic of the interim. And though I so appreciate the Lehmans being here, you've been talking about how you've been doing this for years. I don't think one more meeting is going to get you the resolution that you are looking for the future for other landowners. I think that the Joint Ag Committee next interim needs to take that up so that it is that broader question that Senator Nethercott was talking about that needs to be addressed and addressed well. So I'm going to vote no for this one additional day meeting because I honestly don't think it can do what you would like it to do. And I'm going to encourage the committee to take it up for the next 2 years.
Okay, further comments, committee? Again, I remind the committee, our vote is to whether or not to grant this extra day. I'll state, and I've already been on record as this, I don't think we fix this in one day. And we are about to transition into entirely a new committee. Some will carry over, but I don't know that one more day in December fixes this. My concern is not about the cost or any of that. I just feel like it's deeper than just one more day of decision-making by our Ag Committee. And I do appreciate the Ag Committee's work. Thank you. I respect it, and I'm not sure that we're going to find our solution in one more day. And to the Lehmans, I thank you for taking this on, because what you see is a deeper problem than what we have right now. And hopefully, we can give you the right people in the right place to carry on with a new body, new ag committees, whatever that is, and find your solutions. I heard a deeper concern there in your comments and your concern and your presentation. We need to find a solution for you there. But one more day in December of 2022 isn't going to fix that. But further work by a new ag committee, moving into a new legislature, perhaps will. And I think that we can do it that way. So I'll be a no vote. But with that, I also acknowledge that we're not completely done with this, and compliment the people that have worked so hard on this and your tenacity. My goodness, a lot of years. That's why I was asking about the time frame. I wanted to understand just how far you had worked with this. And I thank you for that. Thank you for coming to Cheyenne today. All right, committee, motion?
I move for approval of the additional day as outlined by the co-chairs of the Ag Committee.
Second? Moved and seconded for the additional day for the Ag Committee. Any further discussion? With that, call for the vote. All those in roll call, excuse me, on this one. Go ahead, take a roll for the record.
Senator Driscoll.
No.
Senator Hicks is excused. Senator Nethercott. Senator Rothfuss.
Aye.
Representative Connolly. Representative Gray. Representative Greer is excused. Representative Summers. Speaker Barlow. And President Dockstader. Mr. President, you have 6 noes, 2 ayes, and 2 excused.
Thank you, committee. The motion for the extra day for the Ag Committee has failed. Thank you to the Agricultural Committee for all of your work throughout this session. And we look forward to the committee continuing on in the next session as well. Thank you to the Lehmans for making the trip and continuing to work on this. Okay, with that, committee, do we need to have an executive session? Okay. Are there any other items that need to be brought before the committee members? All right. That concludes our management council meeting today for this first day of December 2022. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you. Oh, let's take a motion to adjourn.
Mr. Chairman, maybe we could, just before you adjourn, recognize Representative Connolly and Representative Graves' service to the legislature. I think it's probably the last meeting that they will have.
Good point.
And as members of Management Council, they'll both be missed.
Representative Connolly, Representative Gray, thank you for all of your work. Appreciate that. Yeah. Go ahead.
Mr. President, Mr. Speaker, it has been my incredible honor to serve on this committee, but honestly, for the people of the state of Wyoming. Thank you so much. 14 years.
14 years on this committee.
Not on this committee.
Oh, okay.
6 on this committee.
Thank you. Thank you for all of your service. Representative Gray, you're moving on to other things.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and very excited about the next role in the future, but I have to say, and it was a very short time frame where I had to make the decision about the SOS race, and it was a very, very difficult decision because I love this body so much. I love the legislature. And so I just want to say I've loved every minute of it. I love the legislative branch, and thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I've had a motion to adjourn. Any other? Do I have a second to this motion? Second. Move the second to adjourn. We are adjourned. Management Council, December 1st, 2022.